What's going on, filmmaking homies? It's your boy Cody Blue, and today we're pretty much just gonna talk about color grading. I'll walk you guys through how I'm grading my Mavic Pro footage, the footage out of the a6000, and of course the footage out of this bad boy, my a6300. But first, I should probably grade this clip. Now let's do it. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Now, like I said, today we're going to talk about color grading, and this is going to be kind of the first part of a new little series that I want to bring here to the channel. Now, this little series is going to be all about different filmmaking topics like how to shoot, how to edit, how to color grade, how to expose your footage, all of that different stuff. But the difference is I want to try to leave out a lot of the technical and textbook aspects and just explain things exactly the way that I actually do them. Now, I'm hoping this will give you guys a little dive into the way that I'm thinking and my thought process and how I shoot my videos and different things like that, so that hopefully as beginner and intermediate filmmakers, you guys can take your filmmaking to the next level in a quicker way. Instead of learning all the technical aspects and settings and things like that, I just want to tell you guys exactly how I do it so that you guys can get out and shoot better videos right away. So with that being said, today we're talking about color grading, and this is how I do it. Alright guys, welcome back to my Premiere Pro. Now today, I'm going to walk you guys through my exact process that I use when it comes to color grading my footage. So with that being said, I've got a couple different things lined up here for you guys. This first group of clips is from my Sony a6300, which you guys know I'm shooting on a custom Cine4 picture profile. If you haven't seen that video already, I'll go ahead and put a card up at the top for you guys. Next up, we have my Dji Mavic Pro footage. And lastly, again, we have footage from the Sony a6000. If you haven't seen that video, I'll go ahead and put another card up for you guys right now so that you can check that out. Before we get into my actual process, I want you guys to know that I can't actually teach you how to color grade. I can show you the way that I do it and the techniques that I use and the things that I look out for. But ultimately, color grading, just like any other artistic medium, whether it's painting or drawing or anything like that, it all comes down to your own personal preference and your own style. So I can show you the way that I do it, but ultimately you're just gonna have to practice and find a style that you like. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump into my color grading process. The first thing I do for all of my clips is I add my LUT. Now you guys know I color grade all of my footage with my own LUTs, and recently I've been using the Blue LUTs Pack 4, and my favorite LUT has been this Rubicon LUT here. So we'll go ahead and add that, and you can see already it's made some changes to our clip. So here's our before and here's our after. So after I've added the LUT, I go into this basic correction tab and I start making some tweaks to kind of bring out the details and make my clip look a little bit better. So the first thing I'm gonna do is pull these highlights down because I notice I'm losing a lot of details in her hair. So I wanna make sure I pull these highlights down to kind of get some of those details back. So something like that looks great. And then I'm gonna add a little contrast by pulling these shadows down. I almost always pull my whites up just because it makes the clip pop a little bit more, makes it brighter, makes it look good on the screen. So here's without the whites and here's with the whites pulled up. Again, it just makes it look brighter and makes it look more appealing, pleasing, things like that. I'll pull these blacks down and then I'm gonna jump into my curves. So I almost always pull a shadow curve down, highlights up, and then I just kind of play with my midtones a little bit to get a look that I like. I notice on this clip, if I pull my midtones up, it's completely destroying my skin tones. So I don't want to pull them up, and I may pull them down just a little bit. Something like that looks pretty good. And here's our before and after of just the curves. So you can see what the curves are doing there, just kind of bringing out some more details, adding a little bit more contrast. And that's a pretty good looking clip already. Now, like I said, I do really like my skin tones, and I think her skin looks maybe a little bit magenta in this clip. So I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of green, literally only like 1 notch on the green scale. And then I might just warm it up just a little bit. Since we're at the beach, it's supposed to be a warm, beachy vibe. I'll add a little bit of warmth, and I'm gonna go ahead and call this clip good. So here's our before and here's our after. Super easy. You'll notice I only used curves, creative, and basic correction. I pretty much never use color wheels and match, HSL secondary, or vignette pretty much ever. Very rarely, but for my BAMF video, I didn't use that at all. Let's take a look at our next clip. Again, this one I have some white tones, and I really wanna make sure these whites look white. Fortunately, the auto white balance on my a6300 did a really good job of white balancing this clip, and it looks super good. The whites look white already, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm gonna go in First thing I do, add that Rubicon LUT. Looks good. I'm gonna go into my basic. It's really bright here in this top left corner. So I'm gonna bring those highlights down again, bring these shadows down to add a little bit of contrast, whites up to make it pop a little bit more, and blacks coming down. Something like that looks good. Now I think this clip is very slightly overexposed. So I'm gonna bring the exposure down just a tiny bit. Something like minus 0.3 looks good. And then I'm jumping into my curves again. Shadow curve is coming down. A highlight curve is coming up, and then I'll play with the midtones a little bit. Something like that. I'm not gonna bring these shadows down quite as much. So something like that looks pretty good. So basically, as you can see, my process is pretty much add the LUT, and then I'm bouncing between curves and basic correction to make little minor adjustments. I'll do curves, then I'll go back to basic, and then I'll do curves again. And I'm just doing that until I get a look that I think looks good. Again, your clips are gonna be totally different. Your style is gonna be totally different, but you can use these same techniques of bouncing back and forth for your clips to get a look that you're trying to go for. So I think that looks pretty good straight away right there. Here's our before. And here's our after. Super good and punchy. Let's take a look full screen. It looks super good. I really like this shot. Probably one of my favorite shots from the video. So now let's do one last clip here. I'm just gonna blast through this one because it is the same process. So let's go creative, add our LUT. Gonna go to basic correction. Highlights are coming down. I'm gonna bring the shadows up on this one. Whites up, blacks coming down like that. Maybe a slight bit of warmth. I'm gonna come to curves, shadows coming down, highlights coming up, midtones coming down on this one as well. And again, for my midtones, I just kind of play. If up looks bad, then I'm gonna come down. So something like that looks good. I'm gonna bring these shadows down just a tiny bit, maybe a little bit of saturation, and boom. So I'm gonna go ahead and call that one good just for the sake of time in this video. I don't wanna spend too much time. So there's before, there's after. Looks super good. Now let's talk about some Mavic Pro footage. So the process for my Mavic Pro footage is exactly the same. The only thing that I've noticed about the Mavic Pro footage is that I find myself adding a little bit more contrast than I do on my a6300 footage. So let's take a look at that process. Again, we're gonna add our LUT. Looks super good straight away. Here's our before, here's our after. I'm gonna bring these highlights down. I almost always am bringing highlights down. Shadows down for some contrast. Whites coming up to make it pop. I really like how this white on the water starts to pop. Blacks coming down. And then we're going to go play with our curves like we always do. Here, coming up. Another thing I forgot to mention is for Mavic Pro, I almost always add a little bit of saturation as well. So Mavic Pro, I'm adding extra contrast and I'm adding extra saturation. So we'll go like 115 on our saturation. And that clip's looking pretty good. I'm going to come back to my curves here. Something like this, play with my midtones. I think I'm gonna come up with the midtones so that you can see kind of how that makes it pop. Let's check without curves and with curves. So it just makes the image pop a little bit more. It looks super good, and that's the look that I like to go for. I may bring these highlights down just a tiny bit more, and that looks super good. The water is nice and blue. The greens are a nice cool green, which comes from adding that Rubicon LUT. By using the LUTs, you can actually change the colors of like your greens and different things like that, which is why I make my own LUTs. But here's our before and here's our after. I'll give it a little playthrough so that you guys can see. That looks super clean. We'll go ahead and do one last clip here. We might as well just do this one. It's the same process. We're gonna add our Rubicon LUT. Looks good. Highlights are coming down. Shadows are coming down. Whites are coming up. Blacks are coming down. And I'm gonna add a little bit of saturation. Something like that, coming into our curves. And this is where we really make the Mavic Pro footage pop. Just by adding a little contrast curve, bumping up those midtones. Now that's a little intense. I'm gonna dial it back just a tiny bit. Something like that, looks great. So here's our before and here's our after. That clip is just popping. It looks super good. And again, that's just my style. I like my clips to pop. I like them to look clean. And now moving on to the a6000 footage. Again, it's the same process. I'm adding the LUT and then I'm just kind of making some tweaks. But I've noticed with the a6000 footage, my Cine4 LUTs do work. You just have to dial down the intensity a little bit in order for them to work. So let me show you what I'm talking about. We'll go into creative and we're gonna add our Rubicon LUT. And you can see it's coming on really strong. It's a little bit too intense, too much contrast. But all we have to do is go to this intensity slider and bring that slider down. Now this is the reason that I don't use adjustment layers and I add the LUT directly to the clip. That way I can adjust the intensity of each individual clip. If you use an adjustment layer, you would have to cut it and different things like that. It's easier to just grade the clip on its own by itself. So now that we have our LUT on there, same exact process. I'm gonna come to basic. Again, I almost always bring these highlights down. I'm gonna bring shadows down a tiny bit, whites coming up to make it pop. Black's coming down, looks good. And then I'm gonna bounce into curves. I'm pulling a shadow curve down just a little bit here. And what I mean when I say shadow curve, I just mean the shadows. So curves work, basically your shadows are down here, your highlights are up here, and your midtones are somewhere in the middle. So I say shadow curve, but really it's just your shadows. So pulling down the shadows, pulling up the highlights, and then I'll play with these midtones. Again, bringing the midtones up is kind of destroying my skin tones here. So I may bring them down just a little bit. And then, like I said, I'm just gonna kind of bounce back and forth between basic and curves, getting a look that I like. Something like that looks great. I may come a little more there. I might warm it just a tiny bit. You know what? Actually, I might cool it just a tiny bit. Something like that. Here's our before. And here's our after. Looks really good, and I'm not gonna spend any more time on that clip. That's pretty much exactly how I graded it in the video that you guys saw for the a6000. Let's do one more a6000 clip. Ooh, I really like this one. The sky looks great, super good exposure, and it's pretty much the same process. So we're gonna go add our Rubicon LUT. Again, we're gonna bring the intensity down just a little bit. I find between like 60 and 70 is pretty good for the a6000. We'll just go 67 for now. Highlights are gonna come all the way down because I really like this sky. I really like the details in the clouds. Shadow's gonna come down a little bit. Whites make it pop a little more. So again, here's without the whites, here's with the whites. We do lose a little bit of detail in this cloud, but honestly, I don't care. I want it to look good, I want it to pop, so I'm gonna pop those whites up. Bring this down, curves, again, shadows coming down a little bit. Highlights, I may bump just a tiny bit. And then midtones, I'm just gonna kind of play with them down and up. I like them down because I get more details in that sky there. So that looks really good. I'm gonna go just a little less actually. Something like that. Come back to basic. Let's go whites a little bit more. And that's looking super solid. Here's our before. And here's our after. So that's pretty much my entire process when it comes to color grading my footage. You notice it's not taking me a whole lot of time to color grade each one of these clips, and it's a super easy process. I add the LUT and then I'm bouncing back between basic correction and curves, and my curves are almost always something similar to what you see here. So shadows down a little bit, highlights up, and then midtones can either be up or down depending on the clip. This particular clip, I like them down. But yeah, it's a super easy process, and you really don't have to spend a whole lot of time to get super good looking footage. So there you go, guys. That's how I'm color grading all of my videos, whether it's Mavic Pro footage, a6000 footage, or a6300 footage. Those are the techniques that I'm using. Those are the LUTs that I'm using. And that's pretty much my process. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this how I do it video. I plan on bringing a lot more to you guys about how I shoot and how I edit and different filmmaking topics in a real and raw format so that you guys can get an idea of my thought process and how I'm actually doing things out in the field. So do me a favor, if you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more. Don't forget to enter our Hawaii giveaway. We are giving away a trip to Hawaii. The link is down in the description below. And if you have any questions, send them to my Instagram at CodyBlue_. But until next time, we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out. Have a great day.